Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all my review of the Vikings Season 4 mid-season finale right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly, and as always, here to bring you the latest in this week's Vikings episode review, and this is my review of Season 4, Episode 10, entitled The Last Ship. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. Definitely one of the best episodes of the season, quite possibly the best one of the season so far. I love the epic naval battle we got in the first part of the episode, and the time skip we got in the second part of the episode. I totally didn't see that coming, and I'll get into more detail with that later on in this review. So first I want to talk about this epic naval battle we got. So this was the quintessential, and given what we got in the time skip portion of the episode, this is actually the last battle that we know of between Ragnar and Rollo, and pretty much this was the last hoorah for the campaign against Paris. And I mean, we've never seen combat like this on the show before. It didn't even dawn on me until watching this episode that yes, we've never seen a naval battle yet. It's like, of course, we've seen beach battles, right, where the ships dock on the beach, and then of course they have to fight their way on land. And then last season, yeah, we had the ships trying to breach the walls of Paris, what with Floki's ladder contraptions on top of the ships. But we've never had a ship versus ship type naval battle like we saw in this week's episode. I think it was really well done. Granted, I do think they use slow motion a little bit too much, but then again, everybody uses slow motion too much at this point in time. And also, it didn't even occur to me that the platforms that Ragnar commissioned Floki to make that were placed in front of the ships, it never even dawned on me that that would actually be used as the platforms for combat. I thought that was so that the ships could not easily be turned over while they were on, while they were on water. I thought that was more of sort of to prevent what happened over with the forts. I thought that was to prevent that from happening again. That way the ships wouldn't pile up on top of each other. But no, that those served as the platforms for the battle that we got in this episode. So I thought even that was cool. Even the way the battle ended, I thought it made sense. Ragnar can't win them all. And let's face it, Rollo, as instrumental as he was in that victory, it really just boiled down to both commanding officers knowing each other, right? Because let's face it, normally that battle would have ended after the first wave, because Ragnar and the rest of the Vikings expected them to retreat, and of course even the Franks themselves wanted to retreat. And Rollo, I mean, it was a real simple plan. Hey, no, keep attacking. Just keep attacking. Continue the barrage. Continue the charge. And it makes perfect sense. And once again, because even Ragnar said, when Bjorn asked him, oh, what is Rollo going to do next? Ragnar says what he always does, attack. So I think that even though Rollo was, instrumental in that victory, it really did boil down to his understanding of momentum. Rollo knows and understands momentum, and in battle, that's key. That's key for any great victory, and that's what we got in this episode. Rollo returned to Paris, champion of Paris, defender of Paris, and Ragnar and the rest of the Vikings headed back home. Now, I will briefly comment on what we got with Emperor Charles this week, how he took out Count Roland and his sister. Now, I really have to question what was the point of all of their little storyline if this was where it was going to lead, where it was a matter of Charles just deciding to take them both out on a whim. I mean, we got no involvement from Rollo whatsoever. We got no involvement from the princess whatsoever. It really did sort of come out of nowhere. And so once again, just like I said a couple of weeks ago when I discussed Edu's death, what was the point of all of this? What was the point of their involvement in the series if that's the way they go out? Questions. Now, I do have a couple of thoughts, and I'll save that for the end of the review. So you guys stay tuned, because I'm going to come back to this. at the end of this review. But now I want to go ahead and I want to jump and I want to talk about the time skip, because I totally didn't expect to have a time skip in this episode, and I was even a little bit reluctant as to, I'm like, man, why would they do a time skip about 3/4 of the way into the mid-season finale? And now in hindsight, I see, no, it's to set up what we're going to be getting in the second half of the season. And so we did a 12-year time skip, which I think is the biggest time skip we've ever done. Now all of Ragnar's sons are grown. Apparently Ragnar went missing the entire time. And funny enough, why do we decide to go ahead and pick things up right here now? Because two major things have happened. Number one, everyone in Kattegat knows about the failed settlement over in Wessex, and the fact that Ragnar concealed that from everybody. So that's number one. Number two, this is when Ragnar finally does return to Kattegat since his defeat in Paris. And there are so many questions that this opens up. I mean, number one, what's happened the entire time in his absence? What has Ragnar been doing since then? Of course, what have all of our other characters been doing? Because we didn't get to see Lagertha after the time skip. We did get Bjorn. We did see Floki. Apparently, Bjorn and Floki are teaming up to sail the Mediterranean, which that's another thing too. Where is Bjorn leading his party sailing across the Mediterranean? Because I'm going to have to look up some more Viking history, but I mean, dude, the Vikings, they were popping up all over the place back then. So you guys' guesses are as good as mine. So yeah, so we have all of these things going on. We do catch wind. We do learn a little bit about like what's going on in Wessex. The fact that Magnus apparently is 12 now. Of course, he's a ward of King Egbert. This is that and the other. I'm pretty sure we will be going back there relatively soon. And then, yeah, Ragnar shows back up in Kattegat. It's not exactly a warm welcome. His sons are all opposed to him, and he's pretty much thrown down the gauntlet and openly challenged anyone to take him out and take his place as king. Apparently, Ragnar has not been usurped in all this time. He still does have his title. He still does have his throne, and that's where we left off for this half of the season. So, like I said, that time skip brings up so many questions. Hopefully those all will be answered within the next 1 or 2 episodes once the season kicks back off again in the fall. And I'm totally looking forward to it. I'm stoked now. I'm stoked now because I'm a sucker for a good time skip. I'm a sucker for a good time skip. I like the idea, especially if it's a story that has characters that I'm invested in. I always love seeing the characters progress throughout their lifetime, not just within the immediate narrative. So that's why I've always dug time skips, and not every property does time skips well enough, mind you, but I always find them intriguing. For all the reasons I just listed, because they open up a bunch of questions about what has happened in the world in between that time. And so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give my final thoughts on this episode as well as my final thoughts on this half of the season, because once again, as I mentioned previously, this is the first season where we're getting 20 episodes and where it's split up into 2 10-episode portions. We've never done that before. So I'm just going to go ahead and give my overall thoughts on this half of season 4 as a whole. By and large, I will say I would probably put it on foot with last season, although I think there was a lot more drama. I think there was a lot more compelling drama in last season because we did get the whole thing with Rollo and with Floki and with Ethelstan. We did get a lot of that in last season. However, and then also there are questions of, we got a lot of filler, and it really did feel like some scenes were there just to stretch this thing out to 20 episodes. And now finally I'm going to come back to what I mentioned before with Roland and his sister, and then with Emperor Charles, and then also with just several observations I've made about this season in particular, more so than any other season I think of. And I hate to bring this up, guys, but I gotta talk about it. I feel like I need to talk about it. Okay, so here's the thing. couple of weeks ago, I ran across a review by, I believe it was the avclub.com. They currently do Viking episode reviews. They do them every week. And I ran across one of their reviews because the headline caught me, right? The headline caught me. It intrigued me. It was the episode that had, Count Odo and Gwynthwyth and Yidu's deaths in it. It was that episode. And I was reading their review about it. And they made a comment that they said that Vikings was pulling a lot of tricks in order to create impact for their audiences, much in the same way as like Game of Thrones does. And I kind of took offense to that because I never really cared to compare those two series. Granted, they are based within the same type of medieval time period worlds, right? And they both are, dramas and whatnot. But I never really cared to compare those two series, mainly because Game of Thrones is completely a work of fiction, inspired by true events, but still a work of fiction. And Vikings is historical fiction, meaning that we are getting a fictional tale, but the fictional story, the fictional narrative of Vikings coincides with historical events. So they're two completely different genres of storytelling, right? But here's the thing. After I read that article, then I started paying a little bit more attention to the series, and I can't help but notice that there does seem to be as if the writers and the creators of Vikings have started throwing in little things that you would see in Game of Thrones. So for an example, what am I talking about? Okay, Count Odo, Roland, his sister, Emperor Charles, that whole thing, I felt like, the more I think about it, the more I think that was just in the show so that we could have some sexual content in the show. Just like in last season, the whole affair between Egbert and Lagatha, I think, was in for that reason. Same thing with the whole infidelity between Judith and Ethelstan, and then Judith and Egbert in this season. Once again, it's all of these little sexual exploits that previously in the first two seasons, we only got like little snippets, right? Like you might see one or two in the entire season, but I'm talking about now we're getting on multiple episodes. We getting the whole masochism thing, and with the whips and the chains and all that jazz. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Also, Aslog's characterization in this season and the way she looks in that time skip, after the time skip, with the long blonde hair and the extravagant red robe, I'm like, and of course, now she always has a wine cup in her hand. I'm like, she's Cersei. You just made her into Cersei. And then, of course, now the gratuitous violence. Here's the thing. Vikings has always kind of they've always kind of pushed the envelope with the violence. I mean, after the second season, Blood Eagle, I'm like, oh man. And I don't think the show has necessarily gotten more violent, but all in all, I'm pointing these things out to you all because I want to know, am I the only one that's picking up on that? Because, and here's the thing. If in fact I am right about some of these observations, I think it's very misfortunate. I think it's very misfortunate because Vikings, I never thought, granted, there was one point, I believe in seasons 1 and 2, well no, season 1 especially, because Vikings it used to premiere on Sundays and it used to come on after Game of Thrones, so they did compete directly with Game of Thrones. They aired during the same season, they aired on the same night, one time slot after the other. So they did directly compete with Game of Thrones at that time. But in season 2, the smartest thing they ever did, they moved it to Thursday night, which is not a very competitive night for most television networks. But ever since they did that, I never thought that those two shows were necessarily in competition with each other. I never did. And now, especially this season, where we're getting two separate 10 episode parts, and they're completely airing outside of Game of Thrones season, because Game of Thrones does not start until Sunday. I think this would be an issue, but I really have to question some of the things we're getting in the series now, and I'm wondering if they're not in there to pander to that audience, because while I never considered these shows to be in direct competition with each other, they do cater to the same demographic. They are trying to reach the same audience. And so if that is the case, I do have to question whether or not some of the things we're given is meant to pander to that audience to try to get them onto the show. In which case, like I say, I think that's misfortunate. I think that's a terrible way to look at it. I think that's a terrible way to go about it. I think that Vikings needs to focus more on what they did well in their first 2 seasons, what they continue to do well in seasons 3, 4, and moving forward. I think they need to focus more on running their own race and less about what the competition is doing, because I don't think it's the same race. I don't think it's the same race. And even if you wanted to go ahead and put Vikings in a losing race, it doesn't matter. Okay, it's its own thing, and I would really like for it to stay its own thing. I don't want to see it become another rehash or another attempt at trying to reproduce something that's already popular just so that it could have more success. I'm not in that game. I'm just not in that game. So I want to know what you all think about that. I want to know if some of you all have picked up on some of the same things, seen some of the same observations. Please feel free to share all of that in the comments below. But all in all, like I said, I would say season 4, pretty solid so far. I would put it right along right along with season 3, except I think that it does lack some of the compelling drama that we got in season 3. Hopefully that will come back into play as we get the second half of season 4. And I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I've liked this show from Jump Street. I still, regardless of what anyone says about it, struggling in ratings or struggling to get impact with audiences, I don't care. I like the show. I think it's doing a good job. So long as it sticks to its roots and sticks to what it's good at, I think the show will continue to be successful. So that's going to conclude this week's Vikings episode review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. In the comments below, please feel free to share your thoughts on this week's episode. Share your thoughts on anything I brought up in this review, and then let me know what you all expect, what some of your speculations and expectations for the second half of season 4 when Vikings returns in the fall. Currently, I am planning to continue with Vikings when it comes back in the fall, so make sure those of you all keep an eye out for those reviews when they start back up. And for those of you all who have yet to do so, please feel free to check out my other content on OAW. I review other material some of you all might like. Feel free, please check it out. And if you have yet to do so, subscribe to the OAW YouTube channel. Annotation is above head. So with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.